you for joining us. Okay.
Good morning and afternoon and evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much, Laura, Eric, Vannery, who's also on the call, and everyone that has been able to make it on for this very, very welcome and exciting discussion. So, we gathered today for a timely and important fireside chat at the intersection of global leadership, sustainable trade, and Africa-Asian cooperation. This conversation, held in partnership with the Congolese Diaspora Summit, brings together emerging leaders, young professionals, and cross-continental networks to explore the Democratic Republic in Congo's critical role in the global mineral supply chain, climate initiatives, and the future of equitable economic development. More importantly, it creates space for connection, strategy, and actionable insight for those looking to shape careers across finance, policy, trade, and sustainability. So, my name is Angelica Johnson Baptista. It's very lovely to see you, Laura and Eric, on the call. And I represent the Organization for Economic Development and Diplomacy, otherwise known as ODE, and the Black Diplomats Academy, known as BDA as well, here in Windsor, Toronto, Ontario. ODE is a global policy and diplomacy platform committed to advancing inclusive economic development and strategic international partnerships. Through BDA, we equip emerging Black leaders with the skills, networks, and global exposure needed to lead across diplomacy, economics, and multilateral spaces. So, fireside chats like this are central to our work because they allow for us to have honest dialogue, strategic reflection, and a meaningful cross-continental engagement. So, it is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers for our fireside chat. We have here today, and good morning or afternoon or evening to you, Eric Mboma, who is the CEO for Africa at Embed Financial Group Holdings, a Singapore-based insurtech advancing financial inclusion and socioeconomic impact across Africa and Asia. And he is also the co-founder for the African Council on Minerals and Energy, further demonstrating his leadership at the forefront of Africa's critical minerals and energy sectors. With over 20 years of experience across finance, policy, and in regulation, including senior roles at Prudential PLC, Standard Bank, and the DRC's Insurance Regulatory Authority, Eric brings deep expertise at the intersection of markets, governance, and development. And we are also joined by our facilitator, Laura Coupe, co-founder of the Congolese Diaspora Summit. Laura is an experienced facilitator with expertise in African leadership, global trade, and diaspora engagement, and has been instrumental in strengthening connections between the Congolese diaspora and global partners. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished guests to the fireside chat, and I will pass it right over to you, Laura, to do your very distinguished and honored roles.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much for the intro, Angelica, and also thank you to anyone joining us. And then, of course, this is recorded so that folks who are enjoying their Saturday morning, afternoon, or evening, also get their much deserved rest. But thank you for the kind introduction, and also thank you, Eric, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us. And also, again, thanking the U.S. ASEAN Young Professionals Association to convene this great collective together to start a conversation that I think is long overdue. So, and I think Eric is a great example of Africa ASEAN cooperation and the potentials of that. So, looking forward to the discussion. So, Eric, I'm going to start the first question to break the ice. So, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself? As Angelica mentioned, you're the CEO for Africa for the Singapore-based Embed Group Financial Holdings, or EFGH, and then you're also the co-founder of the African Council on Minerals and Energy. So can you walk us through the priorities of EFGH in Africa, and then also more about the council?
Sure, but first of all, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Laura. It's always a pleasure to have a discussion about the global dynamics and Africa, the US, Asia with you. And thank you, Angelica. I think she did the job perfectly well. I felt properly introduced by every single word she came up with. So thank you for that. what can I say? Look, I spent the last 2 decades at the intersection of banking, mining finance, infrastructure, regulatory reform, and digital ecosystems across Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. So I would say that my career basically oscillated between the private sector mostly, but also the public sector. So that gives me a perspective that I think hopefully will help this conversation. Um, when it comes to my experience with DRC, it started with the mining industry with BHP Billiton, and sort of culminated with 2 subsequent roles. The first one with Standard Bank. I became the CEO in 2012 after 4 years and a half in Singapore. Singapore was just right after the financial crisis, so maybe some of you are not in the game yet, but it was a time where the bonuses were disappearing from Wall Street, and the opportunity seems to be sort of dying down and disappearing. So it was the right time for me to look into geographies where I'd never been, but that are actually very meaningful today in the global discussion. So that's how Singapore came about. So after those few years spent there in the mining space, where I understood a number of things in the mining space and the natural resources conversation, I pivoted to the DRC, ran Standard Bank for that many years, and was sort of asked by the government to establish and run the first regulator of the insurance industry in the DRC. When you're in the kind of an environment, you feel that the depth of the financial space, the financial industry is actually shallow. And that creates a huge need in that space. So it made it sort of obvious to look into that space, which I did. I didn't have any background in insurance, but I was being trusted by my parents' country, by my home country to actually be involved. So that was exciting by itself and perfectly matching my background at the Kennedy School, where I always wanted to have a role, to play a role, even in for a short while with the government to help improve the private sector. So I jumped in that role for a brief, for a short time before pivoting into the guarantee funds. The experience there was great, actually, because you learn that investors are not afraid of Africa. They're afraid of uncertainty, essentially. And it's important to convey the message. Spend a couple of years building the structured finance capability of the organization, allowing a couple of $1 billion back the SME space in Africa. That was just before moving into the North Africa and the Middle East space with Prudential, with its expansion plans. They were interested by not necessarily my background in insurance, but my track record of integrity. That's what they wanted. And they wanted a certain type of leadership, and I happened to be matching what they expected at that time. So I joined. And I've been there for roughly half of a decade before sort of starting my own venture with EFGH. This is a platform with which, and please stop me if I'm being too long, but that platform was the opportunity to sort of build the rails of payments, digital inclusion, because the story when you go around the continent is essentially the same. Penetration of the banking industry, of the insurance industry, and any other platform is very slow and shallow. So that's the huge challenge. But when you are able to crack the code and make things happen, such as the case in places like Kenya, for instance, you see that people pick up very quickly. When COVID struck a couple of years ago, Kenya was absolutely at the right place. Digital inclusion was there. Touchless payments were popular and kept increasing. reaching the 95% at least in terms of inclusion in that space. So that's unheard of across the continent. Maybe I'll stop it there, but that was those steps have been a place where you understand that the natural resources are a huge opportunity, but you also realize that institutions are needed to convert those opportunities into wealth creation and power. And that's basically where I think we are all. Africa is standing at the gate, if you wish, of that phase.
And then as follow-up to that, so EFGH ties to Singapore. So where did that origin story start? Because of course you spent time in Singapore, but maybe
Absolutely.
perhaps to just also explain that tie.
Yes. Look, Singapore is quite a unique platform for a number of reasons. Its own history is a place of experiment and drive. But also, I would say Singapore has been at the crossroad between very powerful stakeholders, the United States, obviously, but also China. Even when East and West might disagree, but Singapore has always been a place where those East and West disagree and actually meet and talk and devise new approaches and strategy. So there are certainly multiple illustration of that. I think it comes from the flexibility of this environment. The population of Singapore is probably 60% Chinese or so, of origin, at least ethnic Chinese. So that creates a natural connection with China. But education, language, business practices, financial dynamics are very global, perfectly compatible with the US dynamics and the Western world dynamic in general. So that created quite an interesting place. So when I first moved to Singapore, Singapore was able to build an ecosystem in which the likes of Vale, BHP Billiton, Rio Tinto, and a few other top players, Fortescue, were actually present significantly. Some of them even had their headquarters based out of Singapore. So that's some of the mix that creates the ecosystem where you have the talents, you have the understanding of the global space in those sectors. And then when you bring innovation and creativity, you have the formula for exploring new paths and creating new dynamics there. So that's basically how things started. I would say that from a financial perspective, whether it's banking, insurance, private equity, etc., many of the players also are in Singapore. They might be in some other places, but the fact that they're in Singapore, where, as you can remember, this is next to China, almost 1.5 billion, whether it is China or India. Those two are hovering around 3 billion people in terms of customer base. So that's a significant portion of the global population. So being in that sort of nexus makes it quite an interesting place to be at.
Yeah, and then just to clarify for those who are not familiar with the companies that Eric mentioned, they are mining companies. So
Yes.
so that's also ties back to the Africa piece as well. And then I
Absolutely.
guess now kind of going to the geopolitics of things. So Eric, as I've mentioned earlier, there's this narrative, generally speaking, when it comes to Africa, that Africa wants to control its own resources. And then there are also scholars arguing that ASEAN Africa engagement, especially on critical minerals, is growing, but it's fragmented or nascent. So it's maybe about to start. And so, from where you sit, do you see countries in the ASEAN region wanting to build something different on the continent, or do you think they are replicating patterns of the West or China, as we've already previously seen?
And thank you for that question. I think that the first thing is that relationship between Asia and Africa is not that new. uh, through centuries and even before colonization in Africa and the sad story of slavery. Before that, there was already connections and trade between those spaces. Maybe not as massive as we would like to, but it used to be there. So my first point is that the connection existed, but there is no legacy between those countries and Africa of whatever we know between Africa and the rest of the world, at least the key stakeholders at the global level, Europe or America. It's a different place. That's the first thing. The second thing is that when you consider the story of Africa and Asia, China has been since at least the last wave would be since the independence and maybe even before. China has been sort of in that space where it was leading the countries that did not want to choose between the West and the communist bloc. If you remember the Bandung Conference, I think it was in 1956 or 54, was one of those inaugural time where all those countries wanted to sort of define a different way. They considered they were not big enough to be fighting with the big boys. So they wanted to find a path of their own. There is a say in Africa, which is that when elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. And so they were trying to find a path of their own. And remember, it was independence time for most of them. So there has always been a desire to build a different path and not be looking at the first scenario where European or Western powers would come to build take advantage of the opportunity to extract and export raw materials solely. But they wanted to be in that place where they're part of the game properly, because essentially, when you look at most of those those mining countries, the endowment across the continent is massive, but there is barely beneficiation, let alone refinery and other stages of value addition. All countries across the globe are looking for opportunities to create jobs and build up their economies today. You see some countries being more conservative than they were before, but they're looking for the same thing. They might not be taking the best path, but that's what they're looking for. And it's a genuine and natural desire. So I don't know if I'm addressing your question, but my point is essentially to say that the desire is there. The willingness to be a player in that game is obvious, but it doesn't necessarily equate to the best timing or the best prerequisites. Some things have to be done before. This is an opportunity that really plays into Africa's future.
No, I think it actually sets the scene for my next question because, and also just to clarify, Bandung is in Indonesia, the big conference that Eric was referring to. But essentially, as I've been alluding to, and you've said it as well, there's this huge potential around collaboration, especially on value addition. And a lot of people here in Washington have spoken about how Indonesia could be a model for a number of mineral-rich sub-Saharan African countries in doing that value addition, especially what Indonesia had done in the area of nickel. But I guess the question is, in your eyes, you said some things need to be done beforehand that before that collaboration could perhaps take place. So what do you think what are your recommendations, especially on how Africa and ASEAN countries could do so? Vietnam and Malaysia are others that have done a good job in terms of the midstream processing or of the minerals and to basically turn this into electronics. So a lot of people talk about the potential between Africa and Southeast Asia, particularly when it comes to the processing and refining, or also turning those minerals into the technologies that so many of us consume. So what recommendations do you have on maybe how that collaboration could take place?
I think there may be 3 to 4 angles that needs to be sort of aggregated and done right. Um, if we want to reach that space where Africa is really leveraging of its own resources and sort of using it, leveraging to actually be part of the game at the next level. You have mentioned Indonesia and maybe a place. I would take Indonesia and Vietnam. Vietnam has been able gradually to build a fantastic manufacturing space. They have the expertise, even when it's very demanding, they have been able to build it with a combination of individual skills that you need to build up, but you also need to build infrastructure. I jump around a little bit, sorry about that, but when you look at Indonesia, they've built a coherent framework from a legal perspective. I'm not saying it was perfect on day one, but they've been able to sort of build the right framework so that from a legal perspective, things are done in such a way that it was possible to attract investments and build up that space. So when we talk about Africa, I would say that one initial aspect is obviously making sure that there is local equity invested alongside the investors coming in. You want the investment community, you want the locals to feel part of this conversation. And the best way to do it is to have some skin in the game. So I think it's important to make sure that the structure that we put together allow for that. The second thing that comes to my mind is knowledge and technology transfer and the ability for those countries to actually absorb those technology transfer, because it is one thing to make knowledge available and that's reached locally, but it is another thing to make sure that the educational system locally absorbs that and creates and nurtures the talents that you need to build that. It requires long-term vision, because in some engineering spaces, you need 10 years or so for people to actually be able to contribute effectively. That's another aspect. The third one that I would think of is the logistics platforms, infrastructure in general, the roads, the ports are essential. They're going to be capital intensive most of the time, but you need to be able to make that right. It means ability, and that's what I'm thinking of institutions. You need to make sure that you build that dimension right so that investors feel at ease to commit capital, multi-billion dollars, whether they are local or not, but they need to be at ease to invest long term in sometimes a country that, especially for the foreigners, they might not understand well. But you need to create that environment. When it comes to that point, the time spent with the African Guarantee Fund reminds me that there are solutions existing, generally not always used by everyone, but solutions exist to actually put the security needed, and guarantee funds help with that. But you need to build the different layers so that investors, those who can take the first loss if necessary, are in place, and more sensitive to return players as well are included in the process so that at the right time they can get the return that they expect from these opportunities. So those are the 3 or 4 aspects that I think are necessary if you want to build that space. And maybe another aspect is making sure that we build an environment in which local vendors, but not only, are also part of the whole system. When you look at the way China invests generally, they will come and be able to build infrastructure, which Africa needs desperately. They will build infrastructure, good quality infrastructure quite fast, but they will be approaching their investment opportunity with a very vertical integration type of investment. So that basically excludes a significant portion of local players. Again, I'm jumping around a little bit, but when you have European or Western players, they will come with standards in terms of regulation and safety that are really outstanding. And so at the end of what I'm talking about now, I feel like Africa has to sort of build the right kind of cocktail or relationship and involvement with each partners to build the model in which it will get the best of those two environments.
And then how do you foresee Southeast Asian countries in that ecosystem, or what areas have you seen Southeast Asian companies uh, focus on when they're looking at African markets? Are they looking, clearly mining is one of those, but where do you think Southeast Asian countries are trying to, I guess, I don't want to make it sound like yes, I mean, from the geopolitical sense, what sectors do you see them trying to also lay their stake, knowing that China and the West are there?
Yes. So I think that we have the tradition of Singapore making sure that it cautiously come into the game, that it doesn't frustrate any of the major players, but rather facilitate and makes the relationship more flexible, more adaptable. And I think Southeast Asia is properly is perfectly suited for this kind of spaces. We're talking about Indonesia, for instance, which has been, I think, rightfully brought into the conversation. Those are countries that have been able to sort of go up the layers, the ladders, basically, gravitates toward more value addition in the mining space. You have had the nickel story, the bans around it. But again, you need to do the timing must be right. Banning for the sake of banning would not add value, but at least not long term and not value that's going to be captured locally, because the end game is really capturing the value locally. And I think those countries know that well. Their experience really has been that of going that path. So, I mean, as you know, DRC, since last year until recently, banned the exports of cobalt. And it has seen the price of the metal rise dramatically. That's interesting in terms of market value for the metal for a while. But again, you need to have in place the processing facilities that are required for actually those players to invest, to have something to invest in, and so that the metals can be processed locally and brought to the level needed by the next steps in the production or the manufacturing space. I think that timing aspect is something that we generally don't always have, and we need to make sure that we get at. And obviously, yes, being able to raise the needed capital in the market, which is something that EFGH works on as well. But that's a challenge as well, because the demand is so immense that it's going to take time. And a processing facility, for it to actually be built and operational, takes a few years. I was looking at the US. I think the process in the US itself, I mean, we're talking about the US, we're not talking about just any player. It takes time, even in the US. So it can take more than 5 years and even much more than that to actually go from setting up, building a project to coming to that stage where the platform is able to process the raw material. So Asia and Southeast Asia will remain an important player in that space. They can add value to the space in the DRC in terms of education and trainings. I think that's important. And there's also a space, I believe, for collaboration if strategies of both regions are being aligned. Africa is early stage in how it wants to claim the steps of adding value. Most of those Asian countries have done that for for maybe 2 decades now. They've been good at that. So we should find winning should come from aligning those strategies and making sure that we continue supporting the market and addressing demand with a coordinated supply and value addition systems, let alone the logistics, obviously, because there are some significant players in Africa that are really Singapore-based, for instance, and that really support trade between East and West, including with African inputs. So there is more that needs to be done in that space.
And then I'm going to do a hypothetical question. So my hypothetical question is, say you are the Minister of Mines or Minister of Industrial Policy of any African country, and you had the opportunity to engage the ministers of Vietnam, Indonesia. What do you think are some of the lessons learned that, like you said, African countries that are early stage in the whole refining or thinking through the value addition piece? What do you think some lessons, especially sub-Saharan Africa, could learn from how Southeast Asia industrialized as a matter of policy, and then also how it helped them become, big players on the geopolitical stage as well?
Yes. Look, I think that if there was one thing that we need to certainly consider is how to make sure that uh, we go from our huge opportunity to transforming that opportunity, so the natural resources, into wealth creation and better bargaining power in what we do and what we try to achieve in Africa. And from my perspective is, yes, learning how they've built those institutional mechanisms with more success. Because to be frank, that conversation I think is old around value addition and etc. The reason why it's being brought back to in the conversation today is because of probably the geopolitical context in general. It's making it probably more relevant to talk about it again, but it has already been addressed. At least it has been brought to the attention of those who are interested in those topics multiple decades ago. But the failure has been to build institutions that actually can help drive the success that we all want to see to completion. So yes, to me, yes, it's how you build those institutions. Some of the answers exist already. Having a fair legal framework, bringing efficiency there, controlling tax impact, and all of those things, building infrastructure. But there has been generally, again, Africa is not a one single block, right? You have multiple different regions in Africa from an economic perspective, but also the growth and the success in building institutions is different, and you can see multiple stories across the continent. But the average nation in Africa has not been successful yet at building the robust institutions that they deserve. And I think that's really where I see some collaboration. We all know education is important. And again, I think building the right institutions and aligning to have the best timing possible, to me, are the two things that I think we need to make sure we understand how they have been done right elsewhere, so that we can reflect better on what we can do in Africa.
And have you, from your experience, or have you seen more Africans going to Southeast Asia as well to want to learn? One would assume, or one would think, that folks would be interested in going to Vietnam or Indonesia just to also see things firsthand. And I don't know if EFGH or the African Council on Mining and Energy wants to bring more Africans to Southeast Asia to also expose them there. So I'm just wondering if you've seen an increase in exchange, even though you mentioned the conversations around value addition are not new, but is that something, as part of the educational piece, is that something you've seen an increase in, or is that something you would like to facilitate?
Yes. So I would say that there are at least two aspects that needs to be raised when I'm hearing your question. The first is that I mean I have had the experience of seeing so many African across Asia that I was even surprised. I mean, to see that many. We are used to traveling to the rest of the world. I mean, America or Europe. There are big communities in those geographies, but Asia seems to be a place where those communities are yet still relatively small, but they are growing. So there is a real desire to know more and understand what's happening in Asia and see how linkages can be built, and linkages are being built. The second aspect is that uh, I was still based in Singapore at that time. I think that was in 2009, if I'm not wrong. And there was a Singapore Africa Business Forum, the first edition of that. We participated, I mean, me and the young African community there was really busy organizing those events and bringing in African businesses and governments to meet their counterparts in Singapore and in Southeast Asia. So for many Africans, the reality is clear. Um, it sometimes takes looking east to see west, meaning there is no predefined approach to developing a country. At least that's what you see when you look at Asia. I think it takes a lot of psychology and sociology as well as everything else we can talk about, science and technology and economics, etc. But I think it takes understanding yourself better to understand the conditions under which specific communities can deliver. The same goes when you're running a company or you're running a business. Incentives that work when you're running a business in Singapore are not gonna be the same that are gonna be working when you're doing business in Zambia or Botswana, precisely. So I think that there is an understanding by Africans that we have spent multiple decades trying to copy and paste what would happen in Paris or London or Washington D.C., and we see that it doesn't really work because we are not, the majority of the African population is not French, is not British or American. There is still a lot to be learned from Europe, but the example of what's happening in Asia sort of gives you a different approach, or at least opens your mind to looking at the core of that experience that really talks to each community. And I think people understand that. So I was talking about platforms. The African Union as well has built a platform now that is still sort of growing and will certainly be relevant in the future in terms of policies, conversation, and exchange of experience between different regions. You have quite an active chamber of commerce between Africa and Asia that has led various business missions across the continent and towards Asia, with really the spirit of exchanging those experiences. A couple of funds are also kicking off and starting to attract liquidity from Asia to African assets and opportunities. So I would say something is in motion. We understand how I mean, the globe is evolving. The global community is looking a different way to a number of relationships. And it is that kind of time that you don't need to miss the window so that you're properly settled for whatever is going to come next. And yeah, I mean, if you look at even technology transfer, whatever was possible for Asian countries from America and Europe might not be possible the same way in the future. So that's also another aspect that African need to learn, and Asia, which has benefited from the openness of America or Europe could also be a good source for us to keep learning.
Great. And then I also forgot to mention if folks in the audience have questions, you can put questions in the text box as well. And so I have one of like a couple more questions, and then of course we can wrap up because I know everyone has things to do. But in terms of, you mentioned in terms of investors from Southeast Asia, what do you think will give investors from that region genuine confidence to commit capital to African processing and manufacturing? You mentioned the West has its standards, China has its reasons for doing, or reasons through how they do business in Africa, with which receives critique from the West. So kind of curious, what do you think would help incentivize greater confidence from Southeast Asian partners? And then do they have different standards compared to the other major geopolitical actors operating in Africa, especially in the mining sector?
All the investors that I'm meeting, I've not met everyone naturally, but those that I've met who had an interest in the continent, and generally, I mean, many are trying to do their own work, coming on the ground, and I think that's key, that's essential. And they're basically seeing that some of the positions at the global level are shifting. So they come on the ground and do their own work. North Africa has been able to capture a lot of investment from Southeast Asia, but I would say a lot of Chinese investment as well, adapting to the changing requirement from Europe, for instance. And that they have done that, but they have done a lot of the pre-work that I was talking about in a place like Morocco, because I think it's a very good example. On the coast, I mean, they've built the massive infrastructure, rebuilt some of the ports, railroads, special economic zones have been built that allow investors from Southeast Asia, but generally, but China is very present there. But it has put them in a place where they can literally come and they can basically, it's a plug and play for many of them. So I think that for many of the African stories, it is the time for intra-African cooperation and support, where the heavy lifting is too important for a single country. Neighboring countries should be doing some of the work together. I'm thinking, for instance, in a place that nexus around DRC or between DRC, Zambia, and Angola, and maybe to some extent Tanzania. This is the copper belt. That's the space in the world where you find the best copper at the global level, with sometimes a content of the mineral that is maybe 6-8 times more than anywhere else in the world. Chile is a top producer. I think they're around between 5 and 6 million ton every year. DRC is 3.5 or so million ton today. But the quality of the ore in the DRC is just extraordinary. And it's going to be the same, basically, the same reserve that you have in places like Zambia and Angola. So if those three countries are able to do the heavy lifting in terms of infrastructure, and it's being done right now, at least the project is taken seriously, the main one, which is the Lobito corridor, that many of you certainly have heard of, and there are tons of debate online that everybody can search. But yes, so those are multi-billion-dollar investment generally. Building a deep sea port is going to be this kind of investment. If you look even up north, where there is iron ore in places like Gabon, border between Gabon, I would say Gabon, Cameroon, and Congo Brazzaville. If you bring those together and are able to build the common infrastructure needed in that space, so that it's easier to export that raw material when it's about sending those resources in overseas. A government alone would have a hard time doing it as fast as necessary. But working together, that can be a very different story. So to me, that's the conversation, is looking at those prerequisites, making sure that the curriculum of the engineers is properly revised to build the kind of profile you need to work in those specific spaces, so that you can maybe shorten the training time and intensifies and update the educational sort of track that they need to follow, is one aspect. And obviously working with some of the financiers as well to build the financial package and structure the financing in those areas to be able to you know, build more facilities, the processing facilities in particular. Again, those things can take a decade to be. Some of them can take a decade to be fully built. So some work has to be done on both spaces. African pension funds should be involved in all of those because they exist, they have money, and they should be part of the conversation. That would be my quick one on that.
No, all good. And again, that's why we wanted you to be here, because you bring such a breadth of experience and you've worked across so many regions, and that's why we're so excited. And so I have a couple questions from the audience. So we have one from Elsie Karimere, who asked, so I'm going to repeat this verbatim, but I'll rephrase it. But she wanted to ask if development finance institutions can play a role in connecting Asia and Africa more, since you were talking about different financing vehicles.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that you have opportunities for joint or for collaboration between those DFIs in Africa. Some of them have already started working together a long time ago, building those guarantee funds. I think that needs to be amplified because it's as compared to the needs on the market, we probably need 100 times more than what is available at the moment. Because capital exists in multiple financial institutions. If as a banker, if you look at the loan to deposit ratio in multiple countries on the continent, it's going to be sometimes below 50%, while it could reach 70 or 80%. So the potential is there. So it's about unlocking that potential as well, the financial one, which exists locally, and obviously strengthening the balance sheet of those who understand the Africa risk. Some players in the private sector, like in the banking space, maybe I'm not going to cite a specific name, given that I'm in the industry, but some players definitely understand the risk in Africa. You probably have seen it. A few banks have left the continent from the West. They have left the continent over the last during the last decade, which seem to be counterintuitive, to be honest, when you're looking at the dynamics on the continent. At the same time, it has also been a great time for some of the African financial institutions to actually start opening up and growing. They understand the risk even better than many of the international one. And I think that's going to be important. The more players you have of that kind, the less expensive capital will be on the continent and the likes. Yeah.
So the next question is
I hope this answers.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I hope, Elsie, that answers your question. If not, hopefully, you definitely follow up with us if you want more answers. I hope, Eric, you're also okay if anyone has
Of
questions,
course.
if they can contact you. So our next question is from Ilian Chiza from DRC. So hi, Ilian. Thank you for joining us all the way from Congo. And so she asked, in the context of the global partnerships around critical minerals, what concrete strategies do you adopt to integrate young professionals who may not yet have extensive industry experience, but have strong potential to contribute? So I was also saying before this, Eric, if EFGH is hiring, let the group know, especially since this programming focuses on young professionals. So do you have any recommendations on how the mining sector or the entities we've mentioned can integrate young professionals who have not had extensive experience, but definitely have the potential.
I don't have a strong background in HR, but let me try. I think the first thing is obviously to keep building a culture because we actually started ACME also because we found that the mining culture was not that popular across the board. People live in a fantastic country. These countries, some of the countries I've mentioned, but many more. Senegal is one of them as well. Uh, don't have that culture. People don't really understand what the mining space is all about, not because that knowledge is unavailable, but people might not have been exposed or might have had a different, different center of interest. But I think it's high time to really take this seriously, to take that space seriously, because for any company, it's much better to find locally the talents they need versus having to bring someone who's going to have to adapt to an environment, adapt to a culture, have to bring his family that already had some routines elsewhere in Africa. It would be much easier, it's much simpler and less costly to have the right people on the ground. So culture is important. The second thing I believe is building, having a strong command of what you already know, because you'll find that transferable skills are what is going to make a difference. If you have already been in the oil and gas, or if you have already been in agriculture, or you have a strong background in finance or any other, so it's not just for geologists, right? We need geologists. There are multiple expertise there, and you cannot make it up. But if you understand your expertise, your technical expertise in your space, and can build transferable skills, because what is going to happen at the end is that you need to run a team. You need to assess the performance of what you're doing. You need to identify new opportunities to grow the business, and so on and so forth. You need to be able to articulate the law, understand that space in the regulation that is can be improved or can be leveraged to push and support your own company. We can go on and on. Transferable skills will help. And maybe another thing that I also believe is don't set boundaries for yourself. By that I mean you should not restrict yourself to the geography of where you're born or where you already traveled once or in the past. Look wherever you can learn and be exposed to those companies. And maybe the last point that I would put on the table is networking is important. Getting closer to those who are dealing with the issues is key. I remember that a few years ago, I ended up being in front of a gentleman who is probably running the fourth mining company in the world. And I was surprised that after 25 minutes, he offered me to run his business for the continent. I did not take the job because I set a price to it. Because I'm old enough now to not just take a first experience because it's a nice experience, but I had a different set of demand that were not met that time. But somebody else getting started, grab the opportunity, be visible, be able to articulate clearly and in a very crisp way your value addition to whichever project you meet. And yes, I think those are some of the tools I've seen a few people use very effectively, and in such a way that they are now having quite an interesting career with some of the key players, or some of them have even started their own business. That's also another thing. But for you to start a business in this environment, which is going to be relatively technical, it doesn't hurt to have had that kind of an exposure. Some people are able to just go and they can have the right partner And but someone has to have the understanding of that space. Someone has to have the expertise to share and to use in order to build the right kind of sort of business in that space. But I think opportunities are massive.
And you would also think with whatever companies that feed into the mining sector in especially in Africa in particular, you have all these young people. So there's lots of potential talent that needs to be developed and also could be great engines for greater development and industrialization as well. So thank you for that question, Ilian. And then I have one question that I got via text. And I know we tend to focus on the major Southeast Asian countries like Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, but how if you were maybe Laos or Cambodia, who also are developing their capacity in terms of refining minerals or have minerals themselves, any recommendations for that, or maybe also for African countries to also look towards to Cambodia or Laos or East Timor that may also be looking to develop and grow, knowing that, of course, people like to look at the big players, but just if you have any thoughts there from that audience member.
Yeah, well, I think talents and capital really drive this conversation. Talents and capital. So the ability uh, to actually move and be able to run and drive those projects elsewhere is key. I've met multiple African players, including in Japan. Actually, a gentleman that is currently in Kinshasa and in the exploration space. Uh, that guy is low profile, but he's so brilliant. He has made his mark in Japan before being discovered by other players and being in super high demand. He works specifically in the exploration space to better understand the nature of the resource and the location of the resources across the continent. So that's the job he does, and he does it exceptionally well. I think he's really one of the top guys on the continent at the moment. So, but obviously he came to that with his expertise, but he has never limited his space to Africa or Europe or Australia alone. I mean, he has been in all the other places. So I think those are positive experiences that should inspire all of us to keep that mindset of discovering and pushing the frontier.
Yeah. And then also not to overlook certain countries either, just because,
Absolutely.
yeah, no,
Absolutely.
Cambodia or, uh, East Timor or
Exactly.
or even like Papua New Guinea also has big mining operations as
They
well.
have massing, and
Yeah.
actually, it's good that you putting Papua New Guinea on the table. Many of the key players that you eventually find elsewhere would absolutely value this experience. I know a few gentlemen who have been lucky to have there. So it wasn't the kind of sexy place to go, but they did it, and it's really paying off.
And then maybe one final question, since we have emerging leaders in the room. What are lessons in resilience and strategic thinking that no program or, especially master's program, MBA, PhD can fully prepare you for? So, and then what did you learn from those lessons in resilience and strategic thinking?
When you're I remember when having the fantastic opportunity to be in that phase where you're working on those admissions and getting into those programs and writing those essays and talking about integrity. I was mentioning integrity at some point and how it played out for me in quite a fantastic way. And it played out because I was faced at some point with reality. And I think that's important to be faced with reality because it's one thing to write a story. It's another thing to stand firm and because you have certainly talked about the values you believe in and who you are in any of those papers. It's one thing to say that, and it's another thing to be that. And I think if you have a chance to reconcile both and make sure that there is a strong alignment, it's fantastic. I mean, personally, that has been my experience to be faced with situation where, yes, your values matter. I've also been faced with a situation where your understanding of the local culture makes a huge difference. The return on investment on the project, I mean, you write your IRR and you do your evaluation on the paper. That's one thing. But another thing is to negotiate with people. It's to sort of make things happen on the ground. And like I was saying, the understanding of the local culture is going to make a difference. And I don't know where you are today when as we speak, Laura. You might be in the US, I don't know. But in case you are, I remember when I was in grad school, many friends would actually uh, make sure that they, as part of the curriculum or as part of the program, I would say, they build some time to discover the continent, the African continent. And I think it's well aligned with the conversation today. I personally chose to come back on the continent because people assumed that I knew well how to do business in Africa. I can say that I did not know that much, but I took it as an opportunity, and the minute I spent some time in Africa, I became quickly a scarce resource for those who needed me. And I took advantage of being there to actually embrace quite a wide, array of opportunity. I was positioned. It's this kind of time, just like going in Papua New Guinea. You might be, let's say, scale in terms of talent, you level 2 at that stage, but you're being given responsibility of level 5 because there is actually not much guys around you to fill in those shoes. And you realize that it's because you're exposed to opportunity that you have a chance to actually prove yourself and demonstrate your capability. I'm not sure I would have had that chance if I was in New York, because in New York you're going to have so many talented guys who have the exact same profile you have. But when I went back on the continent, I was one of the only guy around the table, so it was easy for me to quickly stand out and grab the opportunity and leverage the opportunity to even go further. So that's, I think, is essential when you choose to embrace the opportunity itself.
Yeah, yeah. So I am in DC at the moment, and I think something else you exhibit, Eric, is that you have not been afraid to take risks as well, which I think is another great skill or trait to have, because if you don't take risks, you don't see what your potential is. And as someone who did grow up through the US system, I did not travel to Africa or Southeast Asia till I was a professional. So I got to go to Indonesia because of a research project, and then more so went to the continent older. So the sooner the better, in my opinion, that you get exposed to these things, and you also realize how broad the world is. And again, thank you so much for your time, Eric, to speak with us today and with our audience about, I think, a relationship that a lot of people don't talk about as much. But I think, again, like you mentioned, there are a lot of opportunities and potential. And hopefully, with everyone who's part of this ecosystem, we can help bring the opportunities and potential to the forefront, because I think the world ultimately could be better for it. And I think I've told you, Eric, as well, as someone who is US based and usually hears things through the lens of the United States, it's been very refreshing to hear what your insights are from being on the continent, seeing things for yourselves, and you also see how all the different power players engage, which I think is so fascinating and interesting. And again, I think we have a lot to learn from you. So thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. And then also thank you to the US ASEAN Young Professionals Association, and then also Angelica and everybody who joined us today. So if not, then I mean,
Wait,
Bannery, I
wait.
don't know if you have something to say.
Oh, yes, we have one question from the
Oh,
audience.
one more. Sorry, did I miss
Yes,
that?
so I'm
Sorry.
going to allow that. No worries. Okay, one second. Okay.
Hello.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, this is Eliane Chiza again.
Okay.
I am from DRC, but I'm currently doing my master's degree at Oregon State University. I'm specializing in financial analytics. I have a question for Mr. Eric. Would you recommend someone to go back to Congo, given the context of the country right now, about the political problem that the country is encountering for now? Would you recommend someone to go back and develop their career in the DRC?
Look, and thank you for the question, Eliane. The decision to come back is very personal, and I think it's good that it is that way. This being said, I have met, and I actually am sitting on the board of a couple of organizations, and I don't know if you can still see me. So I'm sitting on the board of a couple of organizations, and I'm seeing very brilliant young professionals running the business. I'm sitting in and sort of addressing the huge challenge that we have. So what's happening in Eastern DRC is a drama for most of us, and I don't know if you could hear me because I think that I was faced with a
We can hear you
technical issue.
and see you too.
Okay. So no, I was saying that although it's a personal decision, I've seen brilliant young men and women showing their talents and adding value in a tremendous way and having the reward for it. That reward is not just financial; it's also social and emotional to a certain extent. This is a new frontier. When you look at America, remember when the big things have been done in the US, when people were going west and building the nation. I think we are in that kind of time frame where similar challenges and opportunities arise. And I think that you need to find your pace, but you need to keep your eyes open and look at the opportunities and assess them for what they are. And you would be surprised to see that you can find your way. Are you going to have challenges? Is it going to be easy? I don't think it's going to be easy every day. But I think that the reward and the learning curve is going to be massive for whoever engages in this. You're going to find problems that you did not expect to exist. And you might think, looking at those things from here and now, that they can't be addressed, just like seeing your power outage from time to time. Those will happen. I see them in multiple African countries, but those who address those issues are getting the reward. So that's my attempt at answering your question.
Ilian, does that work? Does that answer your question?
Thank you so much. That was very insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And so sorry for missing your hand.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Hold on. Do I have one more question? Hold on, we'll make sure. Oh, I think there's one more question. So this one is from Elsie again. I'm loving the fact that people have questions. So Elsie is based in Canada. So she said, for us that are still in Canada, for example, what are the important skills that we should focus on while we're still at school or working full time? So I guess Eric also from, I know putting maybe your HR hat on, but for those who are still in school, what should they focus on or skills?
Okay. I guess it depends probably on the profile. I don't know Elsie's profile and what she's interested in or is already good at. But I think that you should technical skills are generally there is a shortage on many technical skills. So if you're in that space, engineering, medical, etc., I think it's good to push as much as you can in those areas because you're going to add value immediately on the ground. But don't neglect the soft skills either, because they can make a difference. I remember that I was not really interested in psychology, sociology when I was much younger or a student, but it plays out so much in what you do. If you're in the space of client in a client-facing space, you want to build the right strategy. Understanding culture and sociology, etc., is going to be quite a differentiation as well for yourself. I hope this helps.
Great. Afterwards.
Mm.
Sorry about that. I think other than that, I think we have no more questions, but thank you so much, Eric, for your time and for those who joined us. And then we will be in touch, everyone. I think we're gonna do a write-up of the discussion with especially Eric. You had some great recommendations in there that I think we would like to share, especially with folks in the US ASEAN ecosystem and how, for example, how Africa fits maybe in these discussions, especially around mining. As we've mentioned, there is a greater interest on the US side. Again, we can't sleep on Canada. Canada is also a major mining company and mining country, as you've mentioned Australia. And so I think it sounds like from a geopolitical standpoint, new connections are emerging. And actually, that's an opportunity for Southeast Asia and Africa to also be part of these major discussions. So thank you all again for your time and wishing everyone a great weekend and got good rest because there's lots of work to do as we've discussed. And again, wishing everyone a great weekend. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.